Hi, I'm June, and today I'll be talking through the impact of challenges involving market and consumer behavior issues on agricultural technology adoption, or ATA, among small to medium-sized farms, specifically as it relates to materialism and wealth inequality, by exploring the specific social and economic factors that influence consumer behaviors and discussing how and why we should use an integrated policy approach to solve this real-world issue. Agricultural technology, or Agtech, faces a double standard. On one hand, many commercial farmers have benefited from the macroeconomic tailwinds of global commodity price cycles, a market increase in net farm income, and capital inflow into Agtech, which have accelerated the growth of software-based agribusinesses and farmers' openness to use Agtech adoption, or ATA, to optimize their productivity. On the other hand, these demands have outpaced the ability of Agtech providers to address the economic inequalities inherent in ATA, because ATA among small to medium-sized farms is not a technological issue in as much as it is a reflection of patterns in consumer behaviors and wealth inequality. While large commercial farms benefit from their scale, concentration of wealth, easier access to capital, and a consumer culture that prioritizes volume and low-cost production, smaller farms face a different reality because they operate in tighter financial margins and are under greater exposure to financial risk, which makes them disproportionately sensitive to the upfront cost of agtech and the delayed or uncertain return on investment. According to a survey conducted by the USDA Economic Research Service, 47% of farmers cite agtech's high initial costs, and 30% cite unclear returns on investment as reasons of avoiding agtech. These challenges are compounded by consumer expectations, specifically an overconsumption mindset, that pressure farms to deliver cheaper food faster with little regard for sustainability. This consumption culture creates a positive feedback loop in which the market undervalues smallholders by pricing smaller farms out. As a result, the spatial heterogeneity of ATA and the challenge of scaling agribusiness models to include small to medium-sized farms have perpetuated an adoption gap, with 61% of North American farmers willing to adopt Agtech versus 9% in Asia. Consequently, policymakers have prioritized government intervention to address these market failures and consumer behavior challenges that disproportionately limit access to Agtech for small to medium-sized farms, primarily through regionally enacted policies, or REPs, that use land use reform or cooperative investment subsidies, or nationally enacted policies, or NEPs, that use fiscal policy and public spending to improve Agtech's farmer-facing affordability and social accessibility. My solution, an integrated policy approach, or IPA, integrates both in a negative feedback loop where REPs increase ATA but create unintended consequences that NEPs help counter. Thus, my thesis is that although agricultural technology has the potential to positively impact food systems and consumer culture, its adoption among small to medium-sized farms is inhibited by detrimental patterns of consumer behavior and wealth inequality in the market that comprise barriers that can only be sufficiently addressed through an integrated policy approach, which is my solution. Although REPs can improve the financial accessibility of Agtech among small to medium-sized farms, the justifications for them differ because their consequences are dependent upon the variable needs and consumer norms of the farms they support. Muntz and Squele, agricultural economics professors at the University of Nürtingen-Geislingen, argue that ATA remains low among smallholders due to scale dependency. The idea that large commercial farms achieve lower costs and higher profit margins through economies of scale by capitalizing on consumer expectations for cheap, abundant food to achieve lower costs and higher margins, and thus support structuralist policies such as tiered government subsidies scaled by farm size or income to avoid this wealth inequality. This challenges the previously held belief articulated by Marr et al. Of the Department of Agricultural Economics at North Carolina State University, that ATA is primarily, rather than tangentially, contingent on farmers' risk aversion to invest in Agtech when its benefits are ambiguous as opposed to the systemic barriers preventing them from acquiring it in the first place, namely the concentration of wealth in large commercial farms, consumer preferences for low-cost, high-volume goods, and markets that reward scale. In this way, both suggest that REPs are necessary but insufficient to mitigate ATA's consumer behavior and market challenges. For example, although REPs that promote regenerative agriculture promote 78% greater profitability by reducing reliance on cost-intensive inputs like synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, while also decreasing the risk aversion and scale dependency traditionally associated with ATA, Johnson et al. Of the Department of Agricultural Economics at Texas Tech found in a Cambridge-published study that restrictive USDA crop insurance termination deadline policies for cover crops actually discouraged farmers from adopting regenerative agriculture by forcing those who followed region-specific cover cropping policies to prematurely terminate the cover crops and thus their insurance coverage. This shows how consumer regulations, which are designed to stabilize commodity markets and maintain low food prices, actually strengthen materialistic preferences for cheap standardized outputs by penalizing small to medium-sized farms that adopt regenerative methods misaligned with these narrow market expectations. And it also shows how REPs perpetuate this double standard. While NEPs increase ATA by reducing infrastructural inequity, their impact is limited without REPs. Brian Whitaker, an agricultural economics professor at Oklahoma State University, found that slow broadband in rural areas limits ATA due to the rural-urban divide. While 100% of urban areas that he surveyed had wired broadband, only 78% of rural areas did. This means that farmers in better connected areas achieve better productivity from Agtech. Thus, he supports federal and state investment in high-speed broadband in rural areas to increase ATA. Again, we can see how this reflects consumer behavior challenge that materialistic markets logics favor efficiency and short-term returns over an equitable investment in infrastructure, which perpetuates the wealth concentration that allows large farms to benefit from ATA in the first place while marginalizing others. Similarly, Kandelov et al., agricultural economics professors at North Carolina State University, analyzed the USDA's low-cost broadband loan program to support increased high-speed internet access in rural counties, increasing revenue by 6% due to higher ATA, but primarily in rural counties near city centers, suggesting that fiscal policies, while helpful, require structural reforms like those advocated by Munz and Squele to address their spatially uneven effects. Again, we're starting to see a pattern emerge because this reflects yet another market issue / consumer challenge. Because in that public investment is often allocated based on cost efficiency that reflect materialistic consumer priorities by favoring regions with higher potential returns rather than addressing structural inequities in underserved farming communities, such that without structural reforms like those proposed by Munz and Squele, which challenge wealth concentration development models through regulations such as tiered subsidies or scaled infrastructure grants, fiscal policies risk perpetuating the same spatial and economic disparities that they intend to resolve. And through this irony, we can see that the most effective strategy to mitigate the challenges associated with ATA is an integrated policy approach that combines REPs and NEPs to address scale dependency, challenge the materialistic consumer and market logic that prioritizes efficiency and profit over equitable access to Agtech, improve the environmental and social feasibility of ATA, and promote mutually complementary interactions or MCIs between them. We've seen how REPs and NEPs individually support the need for my solution, but let's consider why they alone are insufficient as a solution. As we've seen, NEPs are required to overcome technological and systemic barriers like broadband access in rural areas or budgetary decisions that favor wealth-dense regions by providing smallholders with the infrastructure necessary to access Agtech. While REPs are necessary to mitigate scale dependency by providing financial assistance to smallholders to ensure that they are financially capable and motivated to invest in Agtech. Without this combination, market behavior will continue to reward short-term productivity and low-cost production by disincentivizing smallholder investment in Agtech and making the wealth and access gaps that inhibit ATA worse. Furthermore, IPA is flexible enough to optimize the social factors of ATA. Agricultural economist Ali and Rahut established that only when extension services are spread widely enough by REPs and evenly enough by NEPs can they increase ATA and mitigate the digital divide, because extension services are public goods that are often underfunded due to inequitable budgeting priorities. In contrast, social scientist Anna Ramirez from UT Austin found that ATA begins at early adopters and diffuses by landlord-tenant or kinship relationships through REPs, which shows that trust-based relationships can overcome the skepticism and financial hesitation associated with this wealth inequality and material insecurity. Both agree that social networks by REPs and extension services by NEPs must coordinate to increase ATA because their effects are complementary. This creates a negative feedback loop where NEPs like the Farm Security and Rural Investment Act attempt to increase ATA by addressing infrastructural challenges, but actually create unintended consequences like spatial inequities, aka the concentration of benefits in wealthier areas that REPs counter and vice versa. However, these REPs may actually also promote market inefficiency by favoring larger farms or failing to address materialistic consumer behavior, such as the demand for instant returns on investment, which discourages smaller farms from committing to long-term technological investments. This undermines Johnson et al.'s argument that deregulation or any single mode of policy alone can overcome the limitations of ATA. In a best-case scenario, NEPs would invest in technological infrastructure, while REPs would cover Agtech's high initial costs for smallholders. With the necessary technological and economic support, regenerative agriculture, long-run small farm profitability, ATA, and spatial equity would increase, while scale dependency would decrease. This shows that IPA must be personalized to be effective and equitable, and that by combining these approaches, regenerative agriculture would become more accessible, which would increase the profitability of smallholders in the long run, while reducing the scale dependency that privileges larger farms. It would also shift consumer behaviors towards the valuing short-term material gain and reduce the social emphasis on consumption and material wealth. Similarly, regenerative agriculture promotes environmental sustainability by reducing smallholders' reliance on expensive synthetic inputs, only if NEPs have established necessary technological infrastructure. Here, NEPs can also discourage unsustainable ATA practices, such as mechanization or monocropping, to mitigate REP's negative environmental side effects. This makes NEPs and REP's effectiveness contingent on their environmental sustainability. Nonetheless, the materialistic mindset of prioritizing short-term profits and abundant food production due to the consumer demand for low-cost, high-quantity products can undermine the adoption of such sustainable practices unless both policies simultaneously address these behaviors. However, IPA can face recognition and impact lag because policymakers can take months or even years to identify the needs for infrastructural investments and financial assistance for smallholders, and even longer for them to produce tangible results due to political lobbying and increased public spending leading to crowding out. Nonetheless, the solution is relevant because addressing infrastructural and financial barriers is necessary for increasing ATA in the long run, even if bureaucratic inefficiencies arise in the short run. Thank you.